Okay.
Are you ready? 3, 2, 1.
Ew, I don't even want to see it.
Porcupines.
Gross.
Doesn't hurt that bad?
I want you all to go back about 1.5 years ago. I'm going to bring you to a day that I'm sure all of you have at least a slight recollection of. Super Bowl Sunday of 2019. You either had just finished your interview with Regis, or you had all those funny nerves going because it was scheduled for the next morning. Well, I was up in Nederland with my best friend from undergrad, Rosie, who actually still lived 2 blocks away from Regis. I'd flown in the night before from New Mexico's interview and was relieved to have a day to breathe. We were going to go on a hike. I left my phone at her house. I'm not very good with my phone. While feeling relaxed and calm, eating a piece of pizza and drinking a beer, Rosie's phone rang. And it was my mom. Rosie handed me the phone as her face dropped. I anxiously walked out the door. Something was wrong. My mom has told me bad news over the phone before, and I was already shaking. She said, "Andy has been in a bad ski accident, and he's on his way to Renown Hospital as we speak." She didn't know anything else, except that Carly and Tyler were headed down at that moment. Let me pause. Andy is my sister's soulmate. They had been together for over a decade. Andy was also my boyfriend of 8 years, Tyler's best friend from childhood. Andy was my brother. I had lived with him for the past 6 years, and he was the goofiest, tallest, most talented human I know. So I hung up the phone, and I immediately dialed my sister. It was bad. We talked about breathing, about how he would be okay, about sending healing and positive energy, that was all we could do. I told her I would be on a plane as soon as I could. I stayed on the phone with her until they made it close to the hospital. We had to drive back through the canyon to Denver. There was no service for 20 minutes. I told Carly and Tyler I would call as soon as I got service, and it would be okay. That was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Once out of the canyon, Rosie's phone rang. It was Tyler. There were no words. It was a sound I had never heard before in my life. I did not know you could feel that much through a phone. Andy had passed away. Time had stopped. And time will have remained stopped for a long time. I got a flight out of DIA. I hate that airport. I cried. I was so scared. So scared for my future on that plane. Just an unbelievable amount of questions. How could this happen? What happened? How did it happen? What was going on? Was Carly okay? Was Tyler okay? What's happening? Flying west, we followed the sunset. It was the longest, pinkest sunset I'd ever seen, and I hated it. It was 2 hours, took 2 decades. We landed, and I knew the world I flew out of was much different than the world I was stepping off the plane into. Running down the stairs, I dropped my bags as I saw Carly and Tyler sitting there with my parents. It was real. It happened. This experience was the trauma before grief could bombard my every cell, and I share that with you so that you can feel its depth, so that maybe you can touch a piece of that pain. But what I want to talk to you about is a more difficult piece of loss and death. It's how we as humans keep going. How individuals live and breathe with the weight of grief throughout their entire being, and how we as physical therapists will be exposed to grief on a daily basis. This brings me to my first point. Grief cannot be compared. So when I tell you that we will be exposed to grief on a daily basis, I mean it. Some will be grieving the loss of a loved one. Some will be grieving the use of a body part after spinal cord injury. Others may be grieving the passion of a competitive sport they will never play again. And some will be grieving their daily routine due to an acute injury. With this, I ask you to please leave your judgments at home, or try not to create them at all. Grief hurts, and it is their experience of pain, not yours. This moves me into my next point. I think we all would agree it's important to be compassionate, and we have all entered this world of therapy to help the healing process forwards, to get people back to doing what they love. But what do you do when there's a pain that cannot be fixed? This is where I tell you, don't try. There are some pains of life that we will never, ever be able to fix. And the loss of a loved one is exactly that. Megan Devine speaks about the mastery orientation in her book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay. It is this idea that we see things as problems that need correction. But again, what do you do when it's unfixable? Her alternative is companionship. Choose the role of companionship over correction. She speaks to this. When a bone is broken, it needs a supportive cast around it to help it heal. It needs external support so it can go about the intricate, complex, difficult process of growing itself back together. Your task is to be part of that cast for your broken friend, not to do the actual mending. Not to offer pep talks to the broken places about how they're going to be great again. Not to offer suggestions about how your bone might go about becoming whole. Your task is to simply be there. Wrap yourself around what is broken. Your job, should you choose to accept it, is to bear witness to something beautiful and terrible, and to resist the very human urge to fix it or make it right. And that is hard. Companionship and care are so important to all humans, grieving or not. An aspect of companionship with those that are grieving is that much harder than sitting with someone and being present, is the vulnerability of acknowledgement. Acknowledging the truth of being here now with someone when here really sucks. Adrienne Rich writes in a poem, "There must be those among whom we can sit down and weep and still be counted as warriors." So I ask you to be with people in times of loss, any kind of loss. Acknowledge that it is uncomfortable and a scary place to be. But with you, they're not alone.